Hello again, welcome back to RP-0, America. So I've switched from coffee over to water, so hopefully I'll talk a little quieter or a little slower than I did on the previous video. So Earth looks really pretty as we leave it with our Loon Orb 1, whatever I called it, probe. Let's see, whoa, I zoomed way too far out. So we have a nice close encounter with the moon prepared. And so we should be able to carry that out pretty straightforwardly in this video. Let's see, that's probably, Loon Orb 1. So that's the transfer stage that it's currently labeling. And let us, yes, the transition back, loading. All right, yeah, you can still, no, you can't see it anymore. Oh, weird, are those the Hawaiian Islands? Oh man, I have no idea. Maybe it'll be easier to tell. Yeah, I think so, actually. It kind of vaguely looks like California as we are flying away from Earth. So let me check that guess. Sure, let's check that guess. Backspace to select the currently active craft, and yeah, I'm right. Nice. I've clearly been watching enough feeds from space in order to identify things. I guess Hawaii is pretty, I don't know, pretty canonically shaped. It's you can identify things, but yeah, again, California, well, I guess California is vaguely up here. But it looks, the peninsula looks very different as you fly away. So notice that the craft is still rotating, and that's because I went into time warp with SAS off. And I'm okay with that, I'm fine with that. And so there's a transfer stage moving further and further away from us, even after only a little bit of time. And we'll continue to do more, do that even more as we approach the moon. It's going to crash into the moon, whereas we do not plan to crash into the moon. Actually, let me, because, you know, I like persistent rotation. I really like persistent rotation. Let me try to make use of it. Since I do have lots of extra delta V on this craft. Actually, I need to be gentle. I don't want to be a fool. So advanced, I think there's an option to point towards the sun, and I want to point down, like away from the sun, if I recall correctly. Whoa. So let's just make sure that didn't cause us to crash to the moon. But yeah, that's basically what I want. I wanted it to point at the moon, and then I want to put up a little bit of spin, just so we stay kind of spin stabilized towards the sun. I might have said moon sometimes in there. Anyway, so let's go look at the moon and make sure we don't crash. We're not currently scheduled to crash into it. Remove you. Ooh, we're actually getting pretty close, 50 kilometers, but that's still totally fine. It's actually going to make our circularization burn slightly cheaper, slightly more efficient, which I'm okay with. We're going to burn out pretty much all the fuel in doing that. Oh, actually, I need to make so I'll need to check as we approach it. Actually, oh, geez, sorry, this transition just takes so much time. So probably some of my textures are bigger than they should be or something like that. So we're going to leave Earth, and when we're near the sphere of influence change, I will, see, isn't that cool? Kind of spinning, like this is just because it's time warped, making it look like it's spinning so fast, but it's going to stay pretty much pointed towards the sun, which is nice. I'm going to move away from the Earth as it recedes. Oh, I bet I know what's going on. It's telling me that the launch pad is ready. Well, that's great. Kind of wish, I'd like to know a way to make it not warn me of that, because I'm pretty much never interested in jumping out of time warp because the launch pad has reconditioned. That's really never on the top of my priority list, at the moment at least. So we're just going to keep an eye on Earth as we move away from it. And then at some point we will make sure that we are happy with how we're heading towards the moon. Yeah, we're spinning so fast at this time warp that it looks like we're spinning slower. There we go. See, as we reduce time warp, it looks like it's spinning even faster. It looks really cool for me, but YouTube compression probably doesn't do it justice. Whoa, and now our lunar stuff is spazzing. Okay. Okay, so 56 kilometers, and just want to make sure that that still satisfies the contract. Yeah, it's pretty generous. So, sounds good to me. So we're just going to warp towards, oh, nice, I can actually just watch that time. All right, warp towards that node. And it really didn't take that long for us to get very far away from the Earth, but we're slowing down relative to the Earth very substantially. Still pointed vaguely towards the sun. I can't see the moon. I can never... Oh, ooh. I was gonna say I can never find the moon. There I go, actually. No. Oh, wow. Interesting. I usually warp vastly past it when I move to too high of a time warp, but apparently we did just transfer into the sphere of influence, I think, which shouldn't happen at that high of a time warp. Maybe it just jumped out of time warp and back into time warp or whatever. And down. All right. So, good. Just wanted to reinforce that. So the moon moved relative to where we were looking after that crazy jump of time warp. Where are you? I don't know. I don't see the moon. I can never find the moon. There we go. Found the moon. All right. So actually, I'm going to give MechJeb the first a quick save, just in case MechJeb screws me. Go node. This RCS is really overpowered for this probe, but whatever. It is the backup engine, to be fair. That's in part why I'm willing to do that. And then, come on, you're pointed. Oh, no, I don't want to. What? No pointed node. Yeah, that's what I want. That is what I want. And I want it to pointed node. Oh, I see. I told it to pointed node, but it doesn't have any secondary mission. I'm just used to it. Maneuver node editor. I'm used to it then, kind of pointing towards the node and then time warping me towards the node. So execute next node. So it's going to time warp us towards the moon. It's going to gently time warp us because MechJeb is much smarter than me and it doesn't want to warp past the point. And then slow down. And let's see. Yeah, the craft is additionally lit. Ooh, the camera's doing crazy things just because of how fast we're moving. And wow, there's a cop car playing with all the fun sounds it can make outside. Don't know if that's going to be audible or not. Yeah, as we approach the moon, when you're in time warp, it doesn't update the detail of the resolution as much. So I definitely recommend you approach the lunar surface if you're interested in the beauty of the moon, to do it at a slower pace. I think that cop car is pushing up the background noise. Okay, there we go, and it's carrying out the maneuver with plenty of force with this little engine. Because it's such a small probe, even just the 1 kilonewton thruster is plenty to slow it down. And we're probably getting a pretty decent, actually not that decent of a specific impulse, but I think it's because it's a monopropellant. If we were doing bipropellant rather than hydrazine, it was 2 hypergolics, we'd get more delta V out of this. But because it was, again, was enough, it was capable enough for this. Ooh, I love those lunar shadows. Let's go to the free cam because I like that better. Yeah, because where the sun is, it is producing beautiful shadows on the lunar surface. They're just awesome. The moon looks really cool. Amazing work has been done on the moon, in every sense of that concept. But I'm thinking of all the people who've made the RP-0 moon look so much nicer during the last year. RSS moon. I don't know what I said. So thanks to them. All right, so we are orbiting. It is happy. We just need to collect science. Technically, that mission's probably complete. Log radiation data. Sure. We probably have all the science already from this. And analyze telemetry. Sure. Yeah. I don't think there's going to be any new science. Log temperature. Yeah. There's no new science. So that's okay though. We have collected science. Experiment any telemetry analysis from space just above. Okay, so that counts. And now review telemetry and transmit. It says recover that science, and so it's going to transmit the science. It says done, and hooray. We have completed that contract, and we have acquired cash, which is awesome. And we're also going to acquire a fairly low lunar orbit, just because we can. Well, actually, not as low. I didn't set the node as low as I had desired, but really it doesn't matter too much. We've completed the contract, and that's what's important. And I don't think I could turn this into a lunar crasher, because that contract tells you to launch a new thing. And yeah, so this wouldn't count. But really, if you're looking to play RP-0, like if you're taking this, anything you learn from here kind of as a tutorial type concept, do that. Like, try to always either turn as many lunar contracts as you can. So nice big Mara there, big crater there. So just looking what I was seeing, I think that's the Mara, and craters. See, it just looks just so crisp, looks so nice. You can see the shadows, and you can actually legitimately see the features laid out, which is awesome. And that's even kind of a darker terrain than the rest. Genuinely looks a bit more volcanic than the rest of the moon. But yeah, we've achieved orbit. I can crash this if I want. There's all kinds of fun stuff I could do. I definitely do not have anywhere near enough delta V even to put such a tiny craft down on the surface. But anyway, we have accomplished this. Hooray for us. All the monies. So now let's spend the rest of this video trying to launch the next craft. So I might actually get this, well, eventually I'll get this series done, but I might, you know, for all I know, have enough time today to complete this whole mission. I do not know. Apologies. You didn't see it in this video, so if you've forgotten the last video or anything, you may not know what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about our next plans, which are a flyby of the moon using a Gemini craft, which is exciting. So it's 90 days away. I need to make sure I take a contract for it, such that I get cash. What are you requiring me to do? Reach a specified orbit and stay there. So this is telling me to stay in low Earth orbit. No, I mean, obviously it is because it says Leo, but just seeing if I could actually accomplish it. I cannot. And get science data from the surface of the moon. No, I'm not going to the surface of the moon. Crude lunar flyby. Alright, so it tells me when it expires duration. So it's telling me I get 2 years to do it. I'm not going to take 2 years to do it. Look how much cash I just got. That's awesome. I'm going to put some of that advanced cash, because I already have the craft ready to go. I've got tons of cash now. I don't need to spend any of that advanced cash actually doing that. Upgrades, VAB, let's get this construction way faster. There we go. So we're going to put most of that in there. R&D, there we go. So that construction should be much faster. Now we're at 5 build points per unit time. And so now 72 days to construction. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into some more planetary probes to maybe make some cash. Alright, so roll out. So we've got the craft built. We will need to select a couple astronauts, get into the right window and everything. I kind of hope it's a daytime launch, but you just really never know. Launch. Alright, so pilot and engineer. Let's take 2 experienced people like this, who have that experience, on our first flyby of the moon. Apologies if my keyboard's really loud when I type like that. It's just kind of the best spot for my mic. It's a substantial craft. It's a cool one. So I was thinking about a number of different ways to do this mission before, because I like on-orbit construction. And then I realized that I could simply stack everything, because the Saturn-1 can actually throw enough mass in order to throw directly towards the moon. At least when you kind of do what I've done. So you'll see it as the mission unfurls. Sorry, I'll do more construction videos in the future, since now I'm spending a little more time on these recordings than I have been able to in the last month or two. Particularly for like the Gemini direct stuff, which I look forward to showing a lot of that construction. So target the moon, and let's get our inclinations matched. Let's try to get this off the ground. We are gaining electric charge. Okay, good. We're not losing any other resources while we're sitting on the pad, so I'm happy with that. It looks like it's going to be a night launch. Oh well. Pretty sure it's going to be a night launch. There we go. So let's just kind of get vaguely within a degree. All right, good enough. And quick save. So we've got these 2 crew members. Just make sure we're well lit. Does the video look well lit? Hopefully so. So first stage is a Saturn-1. So let's take off the ground. So we've got plenty of thrust to weight ratio on this, because the payload, while impressive and everything, is not particularly heavy. Ooh, I'll have to see if I can capture some. Use the film return camera. for this mission, because these people will be flying near the moon, where they could take some pretty pictures, and returning safely to Earth, hopefully. All right. So it's, it's the payloads themselves are not very heavy, and so we had plenty, even with just a Saturn-1 first stage, we still had a relatively decent thrust to weight ratio, at least the way I consider relatively decent. Anything above 1.15 is decent, because that's what the Saturn-5 has, basically, is a 1.15 thrust to weight ratio. All right, so let's start pitching. So I've launched the first couple stages of this before, but the rest above it are somewhat novel. Oh, and random things on my things to do. It took a while to do the construction, which is possibly why I didn't show it. I apologize. I never remember what I record and what I don't record. But I'm pretty sure I didn't show this construction, just because my doing this construction was a pain in the butt, because my sub-assemblies aren't well suited to that. I need to rebuild my sub-assemblies in a more useful manner, in a more consistent manner. Okay, so first stage, Saturn-1. It's got 8 H1 engines. I've flown a few things with this before. And next stage will be the Saturn IV, or Saturn-4 stage is what it's called. So this is a Saturn-1 stage, this is a Saturn-4 stage, or an S4 stage. Again, I don't know exactly how it's supposed to be pronounced, so I apologize to the pedants. All right. And so let's pitch down. It looks like we didn't pitch over enough early on, or at least by my estimation of what enough is, because usually I want to be down there by the time we are approaching 1 kilometer per second, but I also don't want to come down that fast, so we'll restabilize just a little bit. Whoa. Actually, now it seems like it's pitching way up. Just really wobbling, I suppose. So as the dynamic pressure comes down, we kind of have a bit more freedom. Okay, and I'm just going to freedom to leave the prograde. Even though these engines have a lot of gimbal, we can really go off the prograde very, very substantially, but I just don't want to tempt fate. All right, so we've got plenty of time left. I should have checked. I should check my action groups, because I would prefer to shut down some of these engines beforehand. So I'm going to try, usually I set action groups to 1 or 5, and so I'll try hitting those in a little bit, because one of the good reasons to shut down engines on a launcher, to keep the G-forces down, because the crew doesn't like being crushed. But it looks like I did not set any action groups for those, unfortunately. So they're getting really high G-forces on launch. Fortunately, not crazy high, not like physically damagingly high, just enough that this would be a bad time for them. I do not envy them going through that period of very high thrust. Sorry, and yeah, I really didn't pitch down far enough. So stage burnout. This is not a hot staging craft. So first, that will pull the first stage away from us, and then this will ullage just a bit of force forward to make sure that the fuels are settled in the tank, the engines are stable, and now let's ignite the S4 stage, the second stage of the Saturn-1 vehicle. And just pitch just a dash above the prograde. Don't need to go much, because we lobbed, like, that's hitting so high. So now it's just kind of a balance of numbers, and I have a bit of time to discuss the construction of my vehicle. So standard S4 stage. It's not going to quite get us to orbit, and above that we have the Centaur. That's the standard Centaur we've used before with two RL-10s, you can see there. And that will finish our orbit. Because this payload is too heavy for the S4 stage to place the whole payload in orbit, because that would also mean placing the dry mass of the S4 stage into orbit. But it's enough that it also has a good thrust-to-weight ratio, good enough to finish orbit and then to break orbit and throw this craft around the moon. And containing these 2 crew members, it is a awesome payload. I was thinking of different ways to do this with multiple launches and then do on-orbit construction, because that's the way that, like, on astronautics, you see lots of attempts or thoughts on on Gemini to the moon being, a multi-launch affair. But the Saturn-1 or the Saturn IB does have enough lift capacity to throw a direct flyby, which is awesome. Not by any stretch of the imagination enough to throw more than a direct flyby. You would definitely need to do on-orbit construction to do Gemini to the moon, to any kind of landing with any real kind of hardware, even with like the tiny one-seat Langley lander, which I think it'd be really cool if somebody did realism overhaul or RP-0 with that in mind, where they did a single crew member American lander. But anyway, so even with such a small lander, I believe you would definitely need more than one launch of a Saturn IB. Saturn IB being an upgraded version of the Saturn 1, which uses the S4B stage, second stage, which has a J1 instead of this group of RL10s. And I don't have a J2, so I can't build that second stage yet. There are a lot of the advanced kind of mid to late 60s NASA engines that I just don't have. Okay, so we're approaching our kind of very high lobed altitude, which is why we weren't following the orbital prograde during any of that, because we had, with just the first stage, we'd lobbed this really high, and so now we will pitch above the prograde to kind of keep a substantial portion of this altitude. We will probably let ourselves dip a little bit during the next n minutes of launch. But yeah, I really like this kind of path to the moon because it's accomplishable with kind of medium lift, very early American technology, because kind of in my thinking and my kind of alt timeline, because I like alt history or spec fiction or whatever you want to call it, speculative fiction. But we use the Saturn 1, which was developed in the early 60s, 61, 62, 63, etc. And because we're not investing anything in developing Apollo, we're not heading towards Apollo 3 crew big service module technology. We developed the Gemini a bit early, from Mercury right on, leading on to Gemini, accomplishing a lot of awesome America and world firsts with Gemini. And then we also use this the newly developed Saturn 1 vessel to throw Gemini and Centaur at the moon. And that kind of leaves us with a big gap between being able to do this, because it's still going to be quite a while, like in real time, like many videos, a month or more, before I actually have the technology to put a crew on the moon. Because while this is able to do a great, somebody in the Realism Overhaul thread called this the American Zond, which is a good, if you're familiar with Russian space history, that's a good descriptor, because the Russians were all about world first. They wanted to do all these things before the Americans got a chance to do them. So one world first that they were hoping to accomplish was using the Proton Zond, which is worth looking up and you can construct with Radarnik hardware, because Radarnik makes awesome hardware. You kind of take a cut down version of the Soyuz vehicle and you use a Proton launch vehicle to throw it in this very same trajectory around the moon. So what we're going to be doing, if you've counted the Delta V and have some recollection of moon missions, is we're going to be throwing these people past the moon and returning them to Earth on a free return trajectory. So it's not a big enough rocket to be able to park them in an orbit of the moon at all, because that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to go from flying past the moon to orbit the moon, and then also a lot of energy to be able to send them back to Earth. A lot of unknowns, a lot of development to do that compared to what we're doing here. So the Americans in history skipped developing a vehicle to do this entirely. They kind of did this. They never did any okay, the closest they did to this was Apollo 13, which was not a planned mission, where they sent people, they got quite close to the moon, but in getting quite close to the moon, they were nowhere near orbit of the moon. The Russians kind of had this as a goal. There we go. So that's just dumping the S4 stage, revealing the Centaur, and those engines still appear to be stable, so let us light them. So we're going to have to cancel out this serious downward velocity and then level out. So the Russians, they were hoping to use the Proton to get a world first, because a Proton can't send people, couldn't send Russians to the surface of the moon either, but with the development of Soyuz, they could use it to send a person or two people on a close flyby of the moon, which is a lower energy trajectory than putting them into orbit of the moon and then breaking orbit and coming back to Earth, like Apollo would. Whereas the Americans used the Saturn-V, and even on their very first mission of sending people into the vicinity of the moon, I apologize, I don't recall which Apollo mission that was, but I think it had Jim Lovell. They went towards the moon, they put themselves into orbit of the moon, and they had to be launched by a Saturn-V, which is, an absolute monster of a launch vehicle. And so even just to do the first crewed mission, in the vicinity of the moon, the Americans went right to lunar orbital with a Saturn-V. Whereas the Russians were considering, they wanted to get a world first humans in the vicinity of the moon, huge propaganda coup, would have kind of continued to push the real threat of the space race out to that point, to the mid-60s, 65, 66, 67, whenever they may have been able to accomplish that if history had gone better for them. But that's effectively what we're doing here. We're getting this space first of putting people in the vicinity of the moon long before we have a launch vehicle and hardware to be able to put people into the orbit of the moon, whereas the Americans kind of put time and effort into skipping that mid-step. They went from Gemini, which was amazing, but all in low Earth orbit, just a couple of missions in slightly higher, medium Earth orbit, where they used the Agena vehicle to loft them a bit higher once they docked with an Agena. Then after that, all of this development was Saturn 1B, putting Apollo test equipment into orbit of the Earth, and after that, a full Saturn V, throwing the crew into a flyby of the moon, which this Apollo service module had enough fuel to place them into orbit of the moon, and then break orbit and return to Earth. Sorry to kind of say the same thing again and again, but it's just such a cool difference of tech paths. And I'm kind of doing what the Americans would have done if they had wanted to do that. If they had wanted to make sure they beat the Russians to a flyby of the moon, they could have maybe done that in like in this alt timeline. They developed, say, we carried out the Gemini program stuff in the early 60s, 61, 62, 63, and this would be like 63, 64, wherever we are actually. Yeah, it's, doesn't quite match my imaginings, but regardless, level out. And so we're not doing a direct trip to the moon. We are going to be shutting down the stage, and it does have reignitions, which will allow us to reignite when we are ready to go to the moon. So we just achieve a basic parking orbit. So one risk of this, and why I was thinking it would be tricky but interesting to do with a dual launch, is you can look, and you'll see it a bit here, we're losing liquid hydrogen. It is boiling off. Liquid hydrogen is not a very stable propellant, and Centaur is not meant to keep liquid hydrogen around for a long time. So you can't quite see the difference. So we have just a little more liquid hydrogen here than liquid oxygen, and the Centaur was built that way because rather than insulating it really well to hold liquid hydrogen in for longer, they just made slightly larger liquid hydrogen tank, higher than the ideal ratio, and as a result, as liquid hydrogen boils away, that's okay, we packed extra. And that's just smarter, that's just what they did. And that's, I believe, what the first SLS will do. They will not be insulating that liquid hydrogen tank substantially, like to be able to store liquid hydrogen in orbit for a very long time. Apologies, whatever you may hear in the background, I've got the window open today because that's the cost of living somewhere where it's currently hot. Either I have to do really awkward and annoying recordings where I have to like pre-chill my house with AC, or it's cool enough today that I can use outside air to keep me from dying. Alright, so match plane, intercept target, home and transfer to target. Alright, so we selected the moon, create a node, and there we go. So we're going to have enough delta V to do that throw. I'm going to fine tune this. Maybe between videos, maybe at the beginning of the next video, but we have placed 15 tons of crew and hardware into low Earth orbit, and, ooh, nice, we get to see a little bit of a sunrise here while I talk, and I'll turn all that off. See, I do like that natural light look. Nathan Kell does take it to the extreme. He does not use ambient light adjust at all, even to the smallest degree. But I do like to turn it off sometimes so you can see what the natural scene is lit. You know, the Gemini crew is seeing sunrise from orbit after successfully being launched from a Saturn-1, which in history was never used to launch humans. It was a beautiful test vehicle to develop the proof of concept that led to the Saturn 1B, Saturn IB, which did have crewed Apollo missions. With the Apollo Saturn 1, it launched Pegasus kind of test, like that's really what it placed into Earth orbit as actual science, other than just learning how to build and fly such large launch vehicles. They sent up. You should look it up. I think it was a micrometeorite experiment. The Pegasus experiments launched by the Saturn 1. And these little jets we'll be using to ullage the engine, which we'll need to do. Actually, another cool thing is the boil off of this liquid hydrogen would be vented from a Saturn backwards, like such that it would help to stabilize the fuel, because it's providing a little bit of thrust forward, which is neat. But we'll still have the ability to orient and ullage the fuel. Anyway, this has been RP-0 America. We have placed 2 Gemini crew members successfully into low Earth orbit for a half-orbit park until we throw them at the moon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.